January 3rd, 1941. A screening room in Hollywood. Gossip columnist Hedda Hopper watches a rough cut of a film called Citizen Kane. She recognizes the castle on screen. She recognizes the newspaper tycoon. She recognizes the actress he made into a star. The movie isn't flattering. She reaches for the telephone. 250 miles north, William Randolph Hearst sits in his own castle. 165 rooms spread across 127 acres of terraced gardens. 28 years under construction. Tens of millions of dollars spent. The most famous address in America, built by a man who owned 28 newspapers and reached 20 million readers daily. The castle wasn't just a house. It was Hearst's monument to himself, his stage for performing power, his attempt to write himself into history as someone grand. If you're interested in how America's most powerful men tried to rewrite their own stories and failed, please consider subscribing. Hedda Hopper's call comes through. A 24-year-old director named Orson Welles has made Hearst's life into a movie. The castle is in it. The mistress is in it. The megalomania is in it. Everything Hearst spent decades carefully constructing, his public image, his legacy. His mythology has been turned into unflattering fiction. He owns 28 newspapers. He controls newsreels and magazines and radio stations. He built a monument to his vision on a California hilltop, but he cannot stop one movie. The castle was supposed to immortalize William Randolph Hearst's version of himself. Citizen Kane immortalized something else entirely. To understand how one film could threaten a man who built a 165-room monument to his own power, we need to go back to when William Randolph Hearst was just a spoiled Harvard student with his father's checkbook and his mother's artistic dreams. Chapter 1. The Accumulator. April 29, 1863, San Francisco. A mining millionaire's wife gives birth to an only child. She will spoil him beyond repair. Phoebe Apperson Hearst was 20 years younger than her husband George, a self-made fortune from California gold and silver mines. George was coarse, absent, obsessed with extracting wealth from rock. Phoebe was refined, cultured, determined that her son would have everything she never did: private tutors, private schools. Grand tours of Europe before he turned 16. She took young William to see art and castles and the accumulated grandeur of centuries. She taught him that money could buy beauty, that wealth should announce itself, that a man of means should live like one. George Hearst left William almost nothing when he died in 1891. The $18 million mining fortune went to Phoebe. She compensated by giving her son $10,000 a month, every month, for 28 years, until she died. William Randolph Hearst never learned to live within his means because he never had to. Harvard expelled him after 2 years. The official story involves sending chamber pots to his professors, engraved silver ones with their faces painted inside the bowls. The real story is that Hearst was bored, careless, and convinced the rules didn't apply to him. His mother was disappointed. His father was dead. Hearst didn't care. He had other plans. In 1887, he took control of the San Francisco Examiner. His father had acquired it to pay off a gambling debt, then used it to promote his political career. The paper was struggling. Hearst saw opportunity. He hired the best writers money could buy. He installed the most advanced printing equipment available. He gave the paper a motto, quote, zero. Within 2 years, the Examiner was profitable. Within 5, it dominated San Francisco. The Examiner didn't report news. It created sensation. Murders got front-page treatment with lurid details and sketches. Corruption investigations targeted companies Hearst's own family had interests in. He didn't care. The stories sold papers. Disasters received breathless coverage that turned tragedy into entertainment. This was yellow journalism before it had a name. Hearst understood something his competitors didn't. People didn't want information. They wanted drama. In 1895, Hearst bought the failing New York Morning Journal. His mother provided the money, Hearst provided the vision. He hired writers away from Joseph Pulitzer's New York World by offering higher salaries and better positions. He cut the paper's price to 1 cent. He filled the pages with illustrations, comics, sensational headlines, and stories that blurred fact and fiction. The circulation war with Pulitzer became legendary. Both men lost money. Both gained influence. By 1897, Hearst's journal reached 1.5 million readers. The Spanish-American War made Hearst's reputation. Whether his newspapers actually started the war remains debated. What's certain is they pushed for it relentlessly. Hearst sent reporters and illustrators to Cuba. He ran stories about Spanish atrocities. He published inflammatory editorials demanding American intervention. When the battleship Maine exploded in Havana Harbor in February 1898, Hearst's journal blamed Spain without evidence. "Remember the Maine!" became the war cry. 4 months later, America declared war. Hearst had demonstrated that newspapers could shape policy. He kept expanding. Chicago American in 1900, Chicago Examiner in 1902, Boston American, Los Angeles Examiner in 1904. By the 1920s, Hearst owned 28 newspapers in 13 cities. 1 in 4 Americans read a Hearst paper daily, 20 million readers. He also controlled magazines, Cosmopolitan, Good Housekeeping, Harper's Bazaar. He owned newsreel companies, radio stations, wire services. The Hearst Corporation wasn't a newspaper chain. It was a media empire. Political power should have followed. Hearst was elected to Congress from New York in 1902 and 1904. He barely showed up. He was too busy running newspapers and spending $2 million on a presidential campaign that went nowhere. He lost the Democratic nomination in 1904. He ran for mayor of New York in 1905 and lost. He ran for governor in 1906 and lost. He ran for mayor again in 1909 and lost. His enemies called him William also Randolph Hearst. The nickname stuck. Hearst had influence without office, which frustrated him. He wanted to be remembered as powerful. Instead, he would be remembered as ambitious. Charlie Chaplin, who knew him well, later wrote, "If I were asked what personality in my life has made the deepest impression on me, I would say the late William Randolph Hearst. It was the enigma of his personality that fascinated me, his boyishness, his shrewdness, his kindness, his ruthlessness, his immense power and wealth, and above all, his genuine naturalness." Winston Churchill, after visiting Hearst's California estate, described him differently in a letter to his wife. Quote Pa 44. In 1903, Hearst married Millicent Wilson, a former chorus girl 21 years old. They had 5 sons, George, William Randolph Jr., John Randolph, and David. By 1925, the marriage was effectively over. Millicent stayed in New York. Hearst stayed in California. The California in question was a 19-year-old Ziegfeld Follies dancer named Marion Davies. Hearst met her in 1916 or 17. Accounts vary. He was 53. She was beautiful, talented, and initially terrified of him. Quote 5. The other dancers warned her. Hearst courted her persistently. He sent flowers, gifts, increasingly extravagant attention. Eventually, Marion accepted. The relationship would last 34 years, until Hearst's death. Millicent refused to grant a divorce. Hearst and Marion lived together openly anyway, complete indifference to public opinion. As Churchill noted, Hearst collected obsessively newspapers, magazines, politicians, art. He bought paintings, sculptures, tapestries, entire monastery ceilings from Europe. He purchased architectural elements from Spain, complete doorways, fireplaces, whole rooms. He acquired so much art that warehouses in New York and California overflowed with pieces he'd never seen. By the 1930s, one obituary would estimate he controlled 25% of the world's art market. He didn't collect to appreciate. He collected to possess. April 19, 19, Phoebe Apperson. Hearst died in the influenza epidemic. William Randolph Hearst inherited $11 million and 250,000 acres of California ranch land along the coast between Los Angeles and San Francisco. The property included a hilltop the family called Camp Hill, where they'd camped in luxury tents during William's childhood. Hearst remembered the view, the Pacific Ocean stretching to the horizon, mountains rolling inland, oak trees dotting the slopes. He told his architect he wanted more than tents. He would spend the next 28 years and tens of millions of dollars discovering that comfort was never the point. The castle he would build was never about comfort. It was about performance, about creating a monument to William Randolph Hearst's vision of William Randolph Hearst, about writing himself into history through architecture and art and parties that would be photographed and discussed and remembered. The newspapers made him powerful. The castle was supposed to make him immortal. The architect he chose was as unlikely as the location. Chapter 2. The Builder. Julia Morgan was 47 years old when William Randolph Hearst walked into her San Francisco office in 1919. First woman admitted to the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. First woman licensed as architect in California. She had survived the 1906 earthquake. She had designed buildings that would outlast everyone who commissioned them. Morgan was born in 1872 in San Francisco, raised in Oakland. Her interest in architecture came from her mother's uncle, Pierre Lebrun, who designed the Metropolitan Life Tower in New York. At Berkeley, she studied civil engineering. The university didn't offer architecture degrees yet. Her mentor was Bernard Maybeck, a lecturer who recognized her talent and encouraged her ambitions. In 1898, Morgan became the first woman accepted to the architecture program at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. The French institution had existed for 200 years without admitting a woman. Morgan changed that. She returned to San Francisco in 1902 and worked briefly for architect John Galen Howard. He recognized her abilities and exploited them. "The best thing about this person is I pay her almost nothing, as it is a woman," he told colleagues. In 1904, Morgan passed the California Architects Licensing Examination, first woman to do so. She opened her own office at 456 Montgomery Street in 1906. 2 months later, the earthquake hit. Morgan's building stood while others collapsed. Her Mills College bell tower in Oakland survived without damage. The reinforced concrete construction she pioneered proved superior to traditional methods. Her reputation was established. When Phoebe Apperson Hearst needed an architect, she hired Julia Morgan. Phoebe commissioned Morgan for multiple projects: the Hacienda del Pozo de Verona at Pleasanton, the Hearst Mining Building at Berkeley, the Asilomar Conference Center for the YWCA on the Monterey Peninsula. Morgan understood Phoebe's aesthetic: European elegance adapted to California conditions, classical beauty combined with modern engineering. When Phoebe died in April 1919, her son knew exactly which architect to call. Hearst's instructions were simple. "Miss Morgan, we are tired of camping out in the open at the ranch in San Simeon, and I would like to build a little something." A little something. Morgan surveyed the site that summer. Camp Hill sat 1,600 feet above sea level. Rocky, steep terrain. No roads adequate for construction. No water system. The nearest town was tiny San Simeon, 5 miles down winding hillside paths. Everything would need to be built from nothing: roads, water infrastructure, worker housing. Morgan analyzed the geology. She drew initial plans for what Hearst called Casa Grande, the main house. By late summer, construction had begun. The site posed extraordinary challenges. Workers had to blast rock with dynamite to create level building platforms. They built a dirt road capable of supporting trucks hauling materials uphill and debris downhill. Morgan designed a water system with purpose-built reservoirs collecting rainwater and spring water. Nothing came easy. Everything was remote, difficult, expensive. The workforce averaged 80 to 90 men on site, though numbers fluctuated with seasons and Hearst's finances. The concrete was hand-mixed and manually poured. No modern machinery reached the hilltop in the early years. Workers lived in a camp Morgan designed specifically for them. She visited from San Francisco at least once every other week, sometimes more frequently. Over the 28 years of construction, Morgan made 558 trips between her office and San Simeon. She personally supervised nearly every aspect of the work. Morgan's office functioned as both architectural firm and construction management company. She served as architect and contractor, controlling design and execution. A superintendent stayed on site permanently. A project manager coordinated the daily work. Morgan's San Francisco office employed a full-time bookkeeping staff tracking invoices, billing, and expenses. The operation was professional, disciplined, organized. Hearst was none of those things. He changed his mind constantly. Wings were added, then modified. Towers were designed, built, redesigned. The Neptune pool, the outdoor swimming pool with its Roman temple aesthetic, was rebuilt 3 times before Hearst was satisfied. First version in 1924, too small. Second version, still not right. Third version completed in 1936, finally adequate. Morgan adapted to his changeability. She wrote to him in September 1919. Then, quote 9. She was predicting the future. Hearst's whims made budgets meaningless. In March 1920, he wrote to Morgan, "All little houses stunning. Please complete before I can think up any more changes." He was joking. He would never stop thinking up changes. Morgan's architectural style blended Mediterranean revival and Spanish colonial elements with her signature reinforced concrete construction. Casa Grande featured twin Spanish bell towers, inspired by a cathedral Hearst had admired in Europe. The guest houses, Casa del Mar, Casa del Sol, Casa del Monte, were Spanish Renaissance designs, each containing 10 or more rooms. Every building incorporated materials from around the world. Italian marble, European crystal for the chandeliers, rare woods for paneling. Hand-cut glass tiles from Marion, Italy, for the Roman pool. The Roman pool presented unique challenges. Hearst wanted it to evoke ancient Roman baths. Morgan designed a stunning indoor space with blue and gold tiles, creating an almost overwhelming visual effect. When the tiles were first installed, Morgan thought the finish looked too uniform, too new. She ordered workers to remove the tiles, add a layer of wet concrete, then pound the walls with their fists. The result was a weathered, ancient appearance that satisfied her artistic vision. Morgan worked with Hearst for over 20 years on San Simeon. The castle, though Hearst preferred calling it, quote, 11, quote, was under almost continual construction from 1920 until 1939. Financial difficulties during the Great Depression forced a halt. Construction resumed after World War II on a limited scale, finally ending in 1947 when Hearst left the estate for the last time due to declining health. The castle was never finished. 165 rooms across multiple buildings, 127 acres of gardens, terraces, pools, and walkways, architectural elements from demolished European monasteries, ceilings from Renaissance palaces, doorways from Spanish castles. 20,000 works of art, all of it incomplete, perpetually in progress. Forever unfinished because Hearst's vision kept expanding faster than Morgan could build. Morgan designed approximately 700 buildings throughout her career. She worked until 1950 when she closed her San Francisco office after 42 years of practice. Her health declined. She became increasingly reclusive. On February 2, 1957, Julia Morgan died. She was 85 years old. The castle she designed for William Randolph Hearst remains her masterpiece. The Twin Towers still dominate the Central California coast. The green copper roof catches light visible from miles away. Morgan built permanence for a man who couldn't commit to anything. She created beauty for a client who collected obsessively but appreciated rarely. She spent 28 years translating Hearst's ever-changing vision into steel, concrete, marble, and tile. Morgan understood that buildings outlast the people who commissioned them. Hearst didn't. He thought the castle would immortalize his vision. Instead, it immortalized hers. What Hearst was building wasn't just a house, it was a stage, and by 1925, the players were arriving. Chapter 3. The Enchanted Hill. The bus winds up 5 miles of hillside. Zebras wander across the road. Camels graze near oak trees. A kangaroo watches from the grass. This isn't a zoo attached to an estate. This is 250,000 acres of California, turned into a private kingdom where a newspaper magnate kept the world's largest private animal collection and built what he called La Cuesta Encantada, the Enchanted Hill. The zoo came first, established in 1923, 2,000 acres dedicated to exotic animals. Enclosed areas house the dangerous species: lions, jaguars, chimpanzees, black bears, tigers, one elephant. Larger fenced regions let other animals roam more freely: zebras, multiple species of antelope and deer, camels, kangaroos, ostriches, yaks. Guests driving up the hill passed these animals wandering the landscape as if Central California had been transplanted with African and Australian wildlife. By the 1930s, Hearst employed a full-time veterinarian to care for the collection. The animals had right of way. Guests waited for zebras crossing the road. The castle itself sits at the summit. Casa Grande, the main house, rises 100 feet from ground to the peak of its twin bell towers. Spanish Renaissance architecture meets French chateau design, meets whatever else Hearst wanted. The limestone facade was designed to evoke European grandeur. The green copper roof provides a distinctive landmark visible from the Pacific Ocean, 5 miles west. Casa Grande contains over 100 rooms. Not all are accessible, not all were finished, but all were built to impress. The assembly room spans 83 feet long. A 16th century Spanish ceiling soars overhead. Tapestries from European castles hang on walls. Sculptures from ancient Rome stand in corners. Antonio Canova's marble Venus occupies a place of honor, one of only 3 copies the Italian sculptor made, valuable enough that any major museum would have wanted it. The refectory, the main dining room, stretches 70 feet beneath a Gothic revival ceiling. Long wooden tables seat dozens. Choir stalls from a demolished monastery line the walls. Medieval banners hang from the ceiling. Hearst ate dinner here every evening with his guests, served on fine china with silver cutlery and paper napkins. He insisted on paper napkins. They were more practical. The juxtaposition was typical: priceless art surrounding him, condiments in their original bottles on the table, ketchup and mustard next to million-dollar tapestries. The morning room featured tiles hand-painted in Tunisia. The billiard room showcased carved and painted ceilings from Renaissance Italy. The Gothic study, Hearst's personal office, contained medieval manuscripts and Renaissance paintings. The library held thousands of rare books and an extensive collection of ancient Greek vases, some over 2,000 years old. Every room was a museum. Every hallway displayed artifacts that belonged in institutions, not homes. 3 guest houses surrounded Casa Grande like satellite buildings. Casa del Mar overlooked the ocean. Casa del Sol faced south toward the mountains. Casa del Monte sat higher on the hillside. Each contained at least 10 rooms, multiple bathrooms, sitting areas, private terraces. Each could function as an independent luxury residence. Hearst's idea of Quote 12 involved more square footage than most Americans' permanent homes. The Neptune pool remains the castle's most photographed feature, 104 feet long, stretching across a terrace with views of mountains and ocean. The pool was rebuilt 3 times. The first version, completed in 1924, was essentially a wading pool for Hearst's children. Too small, too simple. The second version expanded the size, but still didn't satisfy Hearst's vision. The third and final iteration, completed in 1936, achieved the grandeur he wanted. White marble colonnades frame both ends. 4 Italian relief sculptures from the 17th century sit at the sides. Statues of Neptune and the Nereids overlook the water from a temple-like structure. An oil-burning heating system, innovative for the 1930s, kept the water comfortable year-round. The Roman pool sits indoors beneath Casa Grande. Blue and gold hand-cut glass tiles from Murano, Italy, cover every surface: walls, ceiling, the pool bottom. 8 statues of Roman gods, goddesses, and heroes stand in alcoves. The tiles create an overwhelming visual effect, shimmering and reflecting light in patterns that shift as you move. The space evokes ancient Roman baths, though no Roman bath ever looked this opulent. Morgan's technique of weathering the walls gave the space an aged quality, as if it had been discovered rather than built. The gardens spread across 127 acres. Terraces descend the hillside in carefully designed levels. Fountains imported from Europe provide focal points. Statuary from Greece and Rome marks pathways. Native California plants mix with exotic species from around the world. Gardeners maintain the grounds constantly. The landscaping alone required a full-time staff. 2 airstrips allowed guests to arrive by private plane. Amelia. Earhart landed here. Howard Hughes landed here. The airstrips could be approached from any direction, making San Simeon accessible to the era's most adventurous travelers. The movie theater, added in 1931, seated 50 people in cushioned chairs. Red damask silk covered the walls. Gilded figurines holding light fixtures shaped like fronds stood at intervals. The ceiling featured more hand-painted details. Hearst and his guests watch movies here every night after dinner. A full-length feature plus a newsreel. The projection equipment was state-of-the-art. The acoustics were excellent. The theater functioned as both entertainment venue and propaganda screening room for Hearst's own newsreels. Inside the buildings, Hearst's art collection overwhelmed visitors. 20,000 artifacts accumulated over decades of obsessive purchasing. Egyptian antiquities, Greek sculptures, Roman sarcophagi. Renaissance paintings by old masters, decorative arts from China and the Near East. Approximately 30 historic carved and painted ceilings removed from buildings in Italy and Spain, then installed in California. Tapestries from the 3rd century, Art Deco furniture and lighting, medieval manuscripts, ancient Greek pottery. Every surface, every room, every hallway displayed objects that belonged in museums. Hearst didn't just buy art, he bought entire architectural elements. 14th century doorways from Spain, 16th century fireplaces from France, monastery walls from Italy. In the 1920s, he purchased the complete Sacramenia Monastery in Spain and had it dismantled for shipping. Villagers attacked his workers, outraged that foreigners were taking their heritage. Hearst didn't care. He wanted the monastery. He got it. The Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings in England organized campaigns against his removal of the 14th century Bradenstoke Priory. Their posters used language so violent they had to be covered to avoid libel suits. Hearst ignored them. The priory came to California. By the mid-1930s, one estimate suggested Hearst controlled 25% of the world's art market. He owned so much that 5-story warehouses in New York overflowed with pieces he'd never seen. Warehouses near San Simeon held Greek sculpture and ceramics by the crate. He bought faster than he could catalog. He purchased collections without examining every item. The accumulation was compulsive, endless, unsatisfiable. The total cost of construction varies depending on source. Estimates range from $10 million to $37 million over 28 years. Adjusted for inflation, that's between $559 million and $700 million in today's currency. The numbers only hint at the scale. 28 years of continuous work, 558 trips by Julia Morgan, thousands of workers. Materials from around the world, the largest private zoo in existence, and all of it, every room, every pool, every tile, every sculpture, was never finished. Hearst told Julia Morgan he wanted something a little more comfortable than camping tents. He built 165 rooms, 61 bathrooms, 41 fireplaces, 127 acres of gardens, 2 swimming pools, a private zoo, 2 airstrips, and a monument to his own vision of grandeur. Comfortable was never remotely the point. But buildings aren't just stone and tile and imported ceilings. Buildings are the people who move through them. And at the Enchanted Hill, from 1925 until 1947, the people moving through these rooms were the most famous people in America. They came by train, by private plane, by chauffeured car. They came because William Randolph Hearst and Marion Davies opened these doors and promised them something money alone couldn't buy. The magic had rules. Chapter 4. The Rules of the Kingdom. You arrive by Hearst's private rail car, overnight from Los Angeles. At San Luis Obispo, chauffeurs transfer you to a limousine for the 90-minute drive over rough dirt roads. The road winds upward. You pass a camel standing near an oak tree, then a group of zebras, then kangaroos grazing as if this were their native habitat. Your driver doesn't slow down. The animals scatter. By the time you reach the hilltop, you're convinced you've entered a different world. Maids meet you at Casa Grande's entrance. They escort you to your assigned guest house, Casa del Mar, perhaps, or Casa del Sol. While you tour the main house with other guests, the maids unpack your luggage. By the time you return to your room, your clothes hang in the closet, your toiletries arranged in the bathroom, everything placed where it should be without you touching anything. This is the first lesson. At San Simeon, invisible hands manage every detail. Cocktail hour begins at 7. Guests gather in the assembly room before dinner. Hearst serves alcohol, but sparingly. Wine flows during dinner. Hard liquor is restricted. Before the meal, you might receive 1 week martini. Cary Grant later recalled. Quote 14, "The restriction isn't about temperance, it's about control. Hearst wants his guests alert, interesting, performing. You're expected to be interesting." This is the unspoken rule that determines whether you receive another invitation. Hearst assembled his guest list carefully. He mixed Hollywood stars with politicians, intellectuals with comedians, writers with businessmen. The combinations were deliberate. He wanted conversation, entertainment, social chemistry. Guests who sat quietly weren't invited back. Guests who monopolized attention weren't invited back. The balance required instinct, awareness, and effort. You're also expected to be active. Don't lounge in your room. Don't spend the afternoon reading in a chair. Hearst provided activities: swimming in the Neptune pool, tennis on the courts, horseback riding through the hills, beach picnics down at the ocean. He expected guests to participate. The castle was a stage, and everyone had a role. Passive observers weren't welcome. Dinner began at 9 o'clock in the refectory. Long wooden tables seated dozens. Hearst sat in the middle, Marion Davies beside him. Guests filled in around them. The food was elaborate: pheasant, wild duck, partridge, venison from Hearst's ranches. Wine came from his 7,000-bottle cellar. The service was professional. The atmosphere was informal despite the Gothic setting. Paper napkins appeared at every place setting unless Millicent Hearst happened to be visiting from New York, in which case linen napkins replaced them. Ketchup bottles and mustard jars sat on the table next to priceless tapestries. Hearst liked it that way. After dinner, everyone moved to the movie theater. Every night. No exceptions. Hearst screened a feature film plus a newsreel, often one his own company produced. The routine was mandatory. Guests who tried to skip the movie found themselves excluded from future invitations. The evening ended when Hearst decided it ended, usually around 11 or midnight. Then guests could retreat to their cottages or continue socializing quietly. The guest list reads like a catalog of fame. Charlie Chaplin came regularly. He performed impromptu routines by the pool, entertained other guests, made Hearst laugh. Clark Gable and Carole Lombard were frequent visitors. Greta Garbo came, though she preferred solitude and spent time alone in the gardens. Cary Grant, Joan Crawford, Gary Cooper, Bob Hope, James Stewart. Hollywood royalty treated San Simeon as a required pilgrimage. The Marx Brothers visited. Harpo Marx, restless late one night, wandered down to the basement vaults where Hearst stored fur coats. Harpo brought out a large stack of mink coats and dressed all the statues in the garden with luxurious furs. The staff discovered the prank the next morning. Hearst found it amusing. Political figures attended regularly. Calvin Coolidge, President of the United States, visited. Winston Churchill came during a trip to America and wrote letters to his wife describing Hearst as a grave, simple child playing with the most costly toys. Franklin Roosevelt attended before his presidency. After Roosevelt won in 1932, Hearst initially supported him. That relationship would sour dramatically, but in the early 1930s, the President of the United States was a San Simeon guest. George Bernard Shaw, the playwright, visited and allegedly described the castle as what God would have built if he had had the money. Charles Lindbergh came after his transatlantic flight made him America's greatest hero. Luella Parsons, Hearst's gossip columnist attended frequently. Her presence guaranteed that favorable coverage would appear in Hearst newspapers. Hedda Hopper, rival gossip columnist, also received invitations despite her complicated relationship with Hearst's organization. Costume parties provided peak entertainment. Hearst selected themes and often chose costumes for specific guests, hiring seamstresses to create elaborate outfits. One party required guests to dress as their favorite movie stars, leading to the surreal spectacle of actual movie stars impersonating other movie stars. Another party had the theme quote 17 quote, producing photographs of dignified adults in children's clothing. A favorite character from History Party inspired Charlie Chaplin to dress as Napoleon Bonaparte. Hearst's 75th birthday in 1938 featured a circus theme at Ocean House, the 110-room beach house he'd built for Marion Davies in Santa Monica. 2,000 guests attended. Bette Davis came dressed as a bearded lady. A full-size merry-go-round was installed, requiring workers to demolish a wall to fit it inside. Clark Gable, Gloria Swanson, and hundreds of others mingled under circus tents. The party cost a fortune at a time when Hearst's finances were already deteriorating. He didn't care. The performance mattered more than the balance sheet. Marion Davies served as hostess for all of this. She managed the guest list, coordinated with staff, set the social tone, made shy guests feel welcome, kept conversations flowing. She was funny, warm, irreverent. Her stutter, which had limited her career in talking pictures, disappeared in private conversation. She did impersonations of celebrities that became legendary among those who heard them. She made the castle feel less like a museum and more like a home, despite the overwhelming opulence. The discretion was total. What happened at San Simeon stayed at San Simeon. Hearst expected it. Guests understood it. Affairs, arguments, drunken incidents, indiscretions. None of it appeared in newspapers. Hearst's own relationship with Marion Davies, conducted openly at the castle while his wife remained in New York, demonstrated the unspoken agreement. The guests performed for each other, not for public consumption. For 15 years. This worked. The trains arrived, the celebrities came, the movies screened, Marion hosted, Hearst presided. The castle functioned as he designed it, a place where he controlled everything. The guest list, the conversation, the schedule, the narrative. But even William Randolph Hearst, who owned 28 newspapers and shaped public opinion across America, couldn't control everything. He couldn't control the economy, he couldn't control other people's stories about him, and he couldn't control Marion Davies. She deserves her own chapter. Chapter 5. The Queen of the Enchanted Hill. History remembers Marion Davies as William Randolph Hearst's mistress, as the talentless actress he promoted beyond her abilities, as the Susan Alexander Kane character from Citizen Kane, the shrill, untalented opera singer who humiliates herself on stage while her newspaper tycoon lover watches in horror. History remembers Marion Davies wrong. Marion Cecilia Duras was born January 3, 1897, in Brooklyn, New York, youngest of 5 children. Her father, Bernard Duras, was a lawyer and New York City magistrate. Her mother, Rose Riley, managed the household. At some point, the family changed their surname from Duras to Davies. Accounts suggest they spotted it on a real estate sign and preferred the sound. Marion attended a convent school but dropped out to pursue show business. By 1916, she was dancing in the Ziegfeld Follies on Broadway. She was beautiful, talented at physical comedy, and burdened with a stutter that prevented her from getting speaking roles. The Follies used her in dance numbers. That was enough for William Randolph Hearst to notice her. Hearst sat front row at the Follies repeatedly, multiple times per week for 8 weeks. The other dancers noticed. Quote 19. They warned Marion. Quote 20. Hearst sent flowers. He sent gifts, silver boxes, gloves, candy. Marion was 19 years old and terrified. Hearst was 53. Married and the most powerful newspaper publisher in America. Eventually, Marion accepted his attention. The relationship began sometime in 1916 or 1917. It would last 34 years until Hearst's death in 1951. Hearst never divorced Millicent, who refused to grant him freedom despite their marriage being effectively over. Hearst and Marion lived together openly at San Simeon from 1926 onward. Complete indifference to public opinion, as Winston Churchill observed. Marion was talented. This needs emphasis because Citizen Kane destroyed her reputation so thoroughly that the truth became difficult to recover. Her early films in the silent era were successful. When Knighthood Was in Flower, released in 1922, became a major box office hit. It was the most expensive film made to that date, and it made money. Marion starred as Mary Tudor. Critics praised her performance. The film established her as a box office draw. Hearst founded Cosmopolitan Pictures specifically to produce Marion's films. He poured money into production values, hired the best directors, promoted the films relentlessly in his newspapers and newsreels. This became ammunition for critics who claimed Marion had no talent, that Hearst manufactured her success. But Marion's best films, her comedies particularly, demonstrated genuine skill. She was funny. She could do physical comedy. She had timing. The transition to talking pictures posed challenges. Marion's stutter made her self-conscious. Quote 21, she wrote later. Quote 22. Yet she managed the transition. Her stutter was slight in private conversation and controllable with effort on camera. She made successful talking pictures through the early 1930s. Hearst's obsessive control damaged her career more than her abilities. He insisted she play dramatic roles when her strength was comedy. He wanted her portrayed as a dignified, serious actress. Marion was naturally irreverent, funny, down to earth. The mismatch frustrated her and confused audiences. By the mid-1930s, her career stalled. Her last film was Ever Since Eve in 1937. She was 40 years old. She retired from acting to focus on Hearst as his health and finances declined. At San Simeon, Marion functioned as far more than the mistress. She was the hostess, the social director, the person who made the castle work as a gathering place. She managed guest lists with Hearst. She coordinated with staff. She kept conversations lively. She diffused tensions when Hearst became irritable. She was beloved by the household staff and most guests. Her warmth, her humor, her lack of pretension made the overwhelming opulence of the castle feel more human. She was also a person with her own life, her own relationships, her own complexities. Rumors persisted of affairs with other men, including Charlie Chaplin. Whether true or not, evidence is thin. Marion was trapped in a relationship with a man she couldn't marry, whose obsession with her career both enabled and stunted it, whose declining years would consume hers. In 1937, Hearst's financial empire collapsed. He owed $126 million. The Hearst Corporation faced court-mandated reorganization. Hearst's assets were liquidated to pay creditors. He had to sell newspapers, close his film company, auction off art collections. Marion Davies sold her jewelry, her stocks, her bonds. She raised $1 million and gave it to Hearst as a loan. She then secured another $1 million from Washington Herald owner Sissy Patterson. $2 million from Marion Davies saved William Randolph Hearst from complete bankruptcy. She didn't have to do this. She could have left. She chose to stay and save him. For the next 14 years, she remained beside him as his power diminished. His health declined. His empire shrank. She gave him loyalty. The irony destroys the heart. In 1941, Orson Welles released Citizen Kane. The film portrayed a newspaper tycoon named Charles Foster Kane, whose mistress, Susan Alexander Kane, is a talentless opera singer humiliated by her own inadequacy. The character was obviously based on Marion Davies. The portrayal was devastatingly unfair. Susan Alexander Kane cannot sing. She embarrasses herself on stage. She's a mediocrity promoted beyond her abilities by a powerful man's delusion. Marion Davies was none of these things. She was a successful actress before she met Hearst. She had genuine talent, particularly in comedy. Orson Welles himself later acknowledged the injustice. In a foreword to Marion's posthumously published memoir, Welles wrote, quote, 24, quote, too late. The damage was done. Citizen Kane became one of the greatest films ever made. It shaped how generations remembered William Randolph Hearst and Marion Davies. The castle became the inspiration for Xanadu. Marion became Susan Alexander Kane. The public image stuck. August 14th, 1951. William Randolph Hearst died in Beverly Hills at 88 years old. Marion Davies was with him. The last thing he did before slipping into his final coma was kiss her. Quote 25. Marion said later, quote 26. The Hearst family excluded her from the funeral. 5 sons, 1 widow in New York, 1 devoted companion of 34 years shut out of the memorial. 11 weeks later, Marion married Captain Horace Brown, a man who resembled Hearst physically. The marriage was unhappy. Marion struggled with alcoholism. She nearly divorced Brown several times, but never followed through. She died September 22, 1961, at age 64, of stomach cancer. She's buried in Hollywood Forever Cemetery in a tomb shaped like a miniature Greek temple. Her family had her original surname, Duras, inscribed above the doorway. Marion Davies gave William Randolph Hearst $1 million when he was broke. She gave him 34 years. She gave him a daughter they never publicly acknowledged. Patricia Lake, raised as Marion's niece, revealed as their child only after her death in 1993. She gave him loyalty until the last conscious moment of his life. In return, his obsession with her became the thing that destroyed her reputation. Orson Welles made Hearst immortal by making Citizen Kane, but he made Marion Davies into Susan Alexander Kane. That lie proved more durable than any truth. The film that immortalized the castle and its builder also immortalized the cruelest fiction about the woman who made the castle a home. The truth was darker than fiction anyway. By 1937, Hearst was drowning in debt. The castle that had seemed eternal was about to become a monument to failure. Chapter 6. The Fall, October 1929. The stock market crashes. William Randolph Hearst's media empire had reached peak revenue the year before. 28 newspapers, 20 million daily readers, magazines, radio stations, newsreels, film production. By 1937, he would owe $126 million. He would be forced to pay rent to live in his own castle. He would sell his exotic animals to the Los Angeles Zoo. He would auction off tapestries and sculptures and George Washington's waistcoat. He would become an employee in the company he built. The collapse wasn't immediate. Hearst's fortune rested on unstable foundations. The newspapers, his primary holdings, likely never paid for themselves. Mining interests inherited from his father. Ranching operations, forestry holdings provided the actual profits. The newspapers gave him power. Real estate and natural resources gave him income. When the Depression destroyed real estate values and commodity prices, the foundation crumbled. Hearst's personal spending accelerated the disaster. At peak, he spent $15 million annually on his lifestyle. The castle at San Simeon consumed millions. Ocean House in Santa Monica required constant maintenance. St. Donat's Castle in Wales cost a fortune to operate. Wyntoun in Northern California needed staff year-round. Multiple residences, multiple staffs, multiple expenses that made sense in the 1920s, but became impossible in the 1930s. The art collecting was compulsive, relentless, financially ruinous. Hearst bought faster than he could display. Warehouses overflowed. He purchased entire monasteries, complete castles, architectural elements by the shipload. The accumulation continued even as revenue declined. By the mid-1930s, Hearst owed money to dealers across Europe and America. They demanded payment. He couldn't deliver. His political shift worsened the financial situation. Hearst had been a progressive early in his career, championing working-class causes. By the 1930s, he'd become deeply conservative. When Franklin Roosevelt won the presidency in 1932, Hearst initially supported him. The honeymoon lasted less than 3 years. Hearst turned against Roosevelt's New Deal policies with increasing venom. He called the graduated income tax communistic. He attacked Roosevelt personally in editorials across his newspaper chain. Hearst's readers were working-class Democrats who loved Roosevelt. They boycotted Hearst newspapers. Circulation dropped. Advertising revenue collapsed. The readers chose Roosevelt over Hearst. The publisher who thought he shaped public opinion discovered he'd misunderstood his audience entirely. The newspapers lost money faster. By 1937, the crisis was terminal. The Hearst Corporation owed $126 million. The interest alone exceeded what the properties could generate. Creditors demanded payment. Banks refused additional loans. Bondholders threatened lawsuits. The empire Hearst built over 50 years was collapsing. A court-mandated reorganization in 1937 removed Hearst from control. A 7-member conservation committee took over the corporation. Hearst became an employee in his own company. His annual salary was cut to $500,000. The committee stopped his $700,000 annual dividend payments. He had no authority over business decisions. Outside managers ran the newspapers, closed unprofitable operations, sold assets to satisfy creditors. The liquidation was brutal and public. Newspapers were shut down or sold. The film company, Cosmopolitan Pictures, closed permanently. Marion Davies's acting career ended not because she lacked talent, but because Hearst no longer had a production company. The exotic animals at San Simeon, lions, tigers, jaguars, the elephant, all the dangerous species, were sold to the Los Angeles Zoo. The free-roaming animals were harder to dispose of. Some remained on the property. Zebras still wander the San Simeon Hills today, descendants of Hearst's zoo. The art sales began in 1937 and continued for years. First, Hearst sold items directly from storage, pieces he'd bought but never displayed. The market was depressed. Depression-era buyers had limited funds. Hearst took enormous losses. In the first year, he sold $11 million worth of art. In 1941, he put 20,000 items up for auction. Paintings by Van Dyck and other old masters, tapestries from medieval Europe, Charles Dickens's personal sideboard, George Washington's waistcoat, Thomas Jefferson's Bible. Furniture, sculpture, decorative objects accumulated over decades, all sold at fraction of purchase price. John D. Rockefeller Jr. bought $100,000 worth of antique silver for his new museum at Colonial Williamsburg. Other collectors picked through Hearst's treasures at bargain prices. The man who had controlled 25% of the world's art market in the 1920s became a desperate seller, accepting whatever bids came. The great accumulator had to liquidate his accumulations. Julia Morgan received instructions in 1937. Stop work entirely at San Simeon. Construction halted after 18 years of continuous building. The castle remained unfinished. Wings were incomplete. Rooms lacked final details. The vision would never be realized because the money ran out. Morgan had made 558 trips between San Francisco and San Simeon. The 559th trip never happened. The castle stood as permanent evidence of interrupted ambition. Hearst had to pay rent to live in his own castle. The property belonged to the corporation, now controlled by creditors' representatives. He became a tenant. The household staff was reduced drastically. The lavish weekend parties stopped. Guests no longer arrived by private rail car. The enchanted hill became quieter, smaller, diminished. Marion Davies saved him from complete bankruptcy. She sold every piece of jewelry she owned. She liquidated her stocks and bonds. She raised $1 million and gave it to Hearst as a loan, asking nothing in return, expecting no repayment. She then convinced Sissy Patterson, owner of the Washington Herald, to loan Hearst another $1 million. $2 million from Marion Davies kept William Randolph Hearst financially afloat when his own empire had abandoned him. The recovery was partial. World War II increased newspaper circulation and advertising revenue. Americans wanted news about the war. Hearst's papers benefited. By 1945, the immediate crisis had passed. Hearst regained some stability, but never regained control. The Conservation Committee remained in place. The corporation operated without his direction. He was an employee with a generous salary, not the lord of a media empire. Construction at San Simeon resumed in 1945 on a limited scale. Julia Morgan was 73 years old. She couldn't maintain the pace she'd kept for decades. She assigned much of the work to Warren McClure, an architect in her office. The construction never approached the intensity of the 1920s and early 1930s. The castle was essentially finished, or as finished as it would ever be. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. Hearst closed San Simeon entirely, fearing the coastal location made it vulnerable to Japanese attack. He and Marion moved to Wintoon, his estate in Northern California, farther from the coast, and presumably safer. They returned to San Simeon in 1945 after the war ended. The castle had been shuttered for nearly 4 years. It never quite recovered its pre-war vitality. The castle survived. The exotic animals were gone, except for the zebras and a few others that couldn't be easily captured. The art collection was scattered, though enough remained to fill the rooms. The construction stopped. Hearst was 74 years old in 1937 when the financial collapse happened. He was 82 when he returned to San Simeon in 1945. He'd lost the empire. He'd lost control of his company. He'd lost most of his art collection, but he still had Marion. He still had the castle, even if he rented it. He still had his newspapers, even if someone else made the decisions. He still had his conviction that he was the hero of his own story. That conviction was about to be tested. In Hollywood, 150 miles south, a 24-year-old genius was about to make a movie. Chapter 7. The Battle Over Kane. January 3rd, 1941. A screening room in Hollywood. Hedda Hopper, gossip columnist and Hearst employee, watches a rough cut of a film called Citizen Kane. She recognizes the Neptune pool. She recognizes the castle with its twin towers. She recognizes the newspaper tycoon character. She recognizes the blonde actress he makes into a star. The movie isn't flattering. It's devastating. Hopper calls Hearst immediately. Orson Welles was 24 years old. Boy genius. Mercury Theater founder. Radio star who'd terrified America with his War of the Worlds broadcast in 1938. In 1939, RKO Pictures offered Welles a contract unlike any director had received. Complete creative control. He could make any film he wanted. He could have final cut. The studio couldn't interfere. Welles accepted and moved to Hollywood. He needed a subject for his first film. Herman Mankiewicz, a Hollywood screenwriter who'd been a guest at San Simeon, proposed a story about William Randolph Hearst. Mankiewicz had soured on Hearst after being exiled from the castle's social circle. He knew the details: the castle, the mistress, the art collection, the megalomania, the political ambitions that failed, the carefully constructed public image that concealed a more complicated reality. Welles seized the idea. The screenplay developed through collaboration between Welles and Mankiewicz, with John Houseman supervising. The character they created was Charles Foster Kane, a newspaper tycoon who builds an empire, runs for governor, loses, builds a castle called Xanadu, takes a mistress he tries to make into an opera star, dies alone, muttering, "Rosebud." The parallels to Hearst were obvious. The fictional castle matched San Simeon. The yellow journalism matched Hearst's newspapers. The political failure matched Hearst's failed campaigns. The mistress matched Marion Davies. The most damaging parallel was Susan Alexander Kane, the mistress. In the film, Kane discovers Susan in a boarding house, falls for her, promotes her as an opera singer despite her complete lack of talent. Susan's debut is a disaster. She can't sing. Critics destroy her. The audience watches her humiliation. Kane, delusional about her abilities, forces her to continue performing. She attempts suicide. Eventually, Kane gives up his opera ambitions for her, but by then Susan hates him. She leaves. Kane dies alone in his castle, surrounded by objects he's accumulated but never appreciated. This portrayal bore no resemblance to Marion Davies. Marion had been a successful actress before meeting Hearst. She had genuine talent, particularly in comedy. Hearst promoted her career, yes, but Marion's best films succeeded on their merits. The Susan Alexander Kane character was a fiction, a narrative convenience, a dramatic device. But it destroyed Marion's reputation more thoroughly than any truth. Welles and RKO tried to keep the Hearst connection secret. Welles limited access to the dailies. He managed publicity carefully. A December 1940 feature in Stage magazine compared Citizen Kane's narrative to Faust without mentioning Hearst at all. The plan was to release the film before anyone connected it to Hearst, generating momentum that would make suppression impossible. The preview screening on January 3, 1941, destroyed that strategy. Hedda Hopper attended uninvited. She recognized everything. She called Hearst's people immediately. Within hours, Hearst knew that Orson Welles had made his life into a movie. Hearst's response was comprehensive and brutal. He banned all mention of RKO pictures in every Hearst newspaper. No reviews of any RKO film, no advertisements, no publicity, complete blackout. RKO had dozens of films in production and distribution. The ban threatened the entire studio's commercial viability. Louis B. Mayer, head of MGM and one of Hollywood's most powerful executives, rallied support for Hearst. Mayer offered to buy the Citizen Kane negative from RKO for the film's production cost, plus a profit margin. The purpose was explicit: burn the negative, destroy the film before it could be released, make it disappear. Mayer coordinated with other studio heads. The major studios, MGM, Paramount, Warner Brothers, Columbia, combined their financial resources to make the offer. They would pay RKO to destroy Citizen Kane. RKO considered accepting. The pressure was extraordinary. Hearst newspapers reached millions of readers. The studio blackout threatened every RKO production. The combined financial power of Hollywood's major studios backing the buyout made the offer tempting. For a brief period, it seemed Citizen Kane would be purchased and burned. George Schaefer, head of RKO, refused. He believed in the film. He believed Welles had created something important. He believed suppression was wrong. Schaefer decided to release Citizen Kane despite the threats and financial pressure. His courage saved one of cinema's greatest achievements from destruction. But Hearst's campaign continued. Theater chains were intimidated. Hearst newspapers ran negative stories about Welles, questioning his patriotism, his morals, his background. Shortly before Citizen Kane's release, the FBI opened a file on Welles. The file listed his supposed associations with communist-affiliated organizations, the League of American Writers, the Foster Parents Plan for War Children. The investigation's timing was suspicious. Documents later uncovered showed Hearst's Washington friends supported the FBI's investigation. The campaign worked partially. Citizen Kane's theatrical release was limited. Major chains refused to book it. Advertisements couldn't run in Hearst newspapers. Publicity was constrained. The film opened to critical acclaim. Reviewers recognized its brilliance immediately, but commercial success eluded it. Citizen Kane lost money at the box office in 1941. The Academy Awards in 1942 should have been a triumph. Citizen Kane received 9 nominations: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Welles, Best Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Art Direction, Best Score. Best Sound, Best Editing. It won only one, Best Screenplay, for Herman Mankiewicz and Orson Welles. The snub was obvious. Academy members had been pressured. Hollywood understood that rewarding Citizen Kane meant defying Hearst. Most chose not to. Orson Welles' career never recovered the momentum his first film should have generated. His second film, The Magnificent Ambersons, was taken from his control and re-edited by the studio. RKO had learned its lesson about giving Welles complete authority. Subsequent films faced financial constraints, studio interference, distribution problems. Welles would spend the rest of his career trying to recapture the promise Citizen Kane demonstrated. He never quite succeeded. William Randolph Hearst succeeded in limiting Citizen Kane's immediate impact. The film failed commercially. The director's career stalled. The suppression campaign achieved its goals in the short term. But time renders different verdicts than contemporary judgment. Citizen Kane disappeared from theaters by 1942. It remained largely forgotten for over a decade. In 1956, the film was re-released. French critics, André Bazin and others, praised it as a masterpiece. American critics reconsidered. In 1958, Citizen Kane was voted number 9 on the prestigious Brussels 12 list at the World Expo. By the 1960s, the film's reputation was established. In 1962, Citizen Kane topped the Sight and Sound Critics poll as the greatest film ever made. It held that position in every subsequent poll until 2012, 50 years at number 1. The film Hearst tried to suppress became the most celebrated film in cinema history. Charles Foster Kane became the definitive portrait of power and its discontents. Xanadu became the symbol of wealth's emptiness. Quote 30 became a cultural reference point known worldwide, and William Randolph Hearst became inseparable from the fictional character Orson Welles and Herman Mankiewicz created. The irony destroys everything. Hearst spent $559 million in today's currency building a monument to his vision. He spent decades controlling narratives through 28 newspapers. He shaped public opinion, influenced wars, made and destroyed political careers. But he couldn't stop one 24-year-old from making a movie, and that movie became the monument that mattered. Not the castle, not the newspapers, not the empire. Citizen Kane, the thing he tried to destroy, became the thing that defined him. Marion Davies paid the price. The Susan Alexander Kane character destroyed her reputation. The lie proved more durable than any truth. Orson Welles later acknowledged the injustice. Too late, the damage was permanent. William Randolph Hearst spent his last years watching everything unravel: the financial collapse, the loss of control, the physical decline, and now a movie that rewrote his legacy despite his best efforts to suppress it. The pattern was complete. The man who tried to rewrite history from inside his castle discovered history rewrote him instead. Hearst had 6 more years at San Simeon. He would spend them watching the castle become a monument to failure rather than triumph. Chapter 8. The Last Years, 1945. World War II ends. William Randolph Hearst returns to San Simeon after 3 years at Wintoon. He is 82 years old. Julia Morgan is 73. They resume construction on a limited scale. Neither of them will finish what they started. The castle had been closed since Pearl Harbor in 1941. Hearst feared the coastal location made it vulnerable to Japanese attack. The fear was probably irrational. San Simeon was remote, militarily insignificant, unlikely to be targeted. But Hearst was 80 years old in 1942, and no longer thinking clearly about all things. He and Marion moved inland to Wintoon, the Bavarian village estate in Northern California he'd built on property inherited from his mother. They returned to San Simeon in 1945, but the castle had changed. The staff was smaller. The weekend parties didn't resume. The guest lists remained modest. The financial constraints from the 1937 collapse still limited what Hearst could afford. He was a tenant paying rent to the corporation he'd founded. The magic of the 1920s and early 30s couldn't be recreated. Julia Morgan resumed work, but she was 73 years old. 558 trips between San Francisco and San Simeon over 25 years had exhausted her. She assigned much of the work to Warren McClure, an architect in her office. Morgan still supervised, still reviewed plans, but she couldn't maintain the intensity the project had demanded earlier. The castle was essentially finished, or as finished as it would ever be without Hearst's continued willingness to fund endless changes. The construction that resumed was minor compared to earlier decades. Detail work, finishing touches, small modifications. Nothing approached the scale of building Casa Grande or excavating the Neptune pool or installing imported monastery ceilings. The grand ambitions had ended. What remained was maintenance and minor improvements. May 1947. Hearst's health declined rapidly. He was 84 years old. The castle's remoteness became a liability rather than an asset. Medical care required proximity to hospitals and specialists. San Simeon was 5 miles from the nearest town, 90 minutes from San Luis Obispo, hours from Los Angeles. If Hearst needed emergency medical treatment, the castle's isolation could kill him. Marion Davies and Hearst's doctors insisted he move to Los Angeles. Hearst resisted. The castle was his monument. Leaving it meant admitting defeat, acknowledging mortality, accepting that the enchanted hill would continue without him. But his health left no choice. In early May 1947, William Randolph Hearst left San Simeon for the last time. He never came back. They moved to Marion's house in Beverly Hills at 1007 North Beverly Drive. The house was comfortable but ordinary compared to the castle. Marion cared for Hearst during his final years. His 5 sons visited occasionally. Millicent remained in New York, still legally his wife, still refusing divorce, still receiving financial support, but no longer pretending at reconciliation. Hearst's media empire continued without him. The Conservation Committee still controlled the Hearst Corporation. Newspapers operated under professional management. The empire that had reached 28 papers at peak was now reduced to 8. The magazines continued. The wire services functioned. But William Randolph Hearst had no authority over any of it. He read his own newspapers as an outsider. August 14th, 1951. William Randolph Hearst died at 1007 North Beverly Drive. He was 88 years old. Marion Davies was with him at the end. The last thing Hearst did before slipping into his final coma was kiss Marion. Quote 31. Witnesses reported, a 34-year relationship ended with that gesture. Marion kept vigil for 3 days without sleeping. Hearst never regained consciousness. When he died, the Hearst family moved quickly. They arranged the funeral without consulting Marion. They excluded her from the service. 5 sons, 1 widow in New York, 1 devoted companion of 34 years, shut out of the memorial. Quote 32. Marion said later, quote, 33. The funeral was held in San Francisco. The pallbearers included Herbert Hoover, Earl Warren, Douglas MacArthur, Bernard Baruch, and Louis B. Mayer, political figures and Hollywood power who'd known Hearst during his peak years. The service was private. Marion wasn't invited. The family's message was clear. The mistress had no place in the official mourning. 11 weeks after Hearst's death, Marion married Captain Horace Brown. Brown was a sea captain who physically resembled Hearst. The marriage was impulsive, possibly an attempt to fill the void Hearst's death created. It didn't work. Marion and Brown were incompatible. She nearly divorced him several times but never followed through. Friends described the marriage as unhappy. Marion struggled with alcoholism during these years. She died September 22, 1961, at age 64, of stomach cancer. Julia Morgan had closed her San Francisco office in 1950. After 42 years of architectural practice, she retired. Her health declined. She became increasingly reclusive. On February 2, 1957, Julia Morgan died at age 85. The architect who designed Hearst Castle, who made 558 trips to San Simeon, who built one of America's most recognizable landmarks, died in obscurity. Her obituary noted the castle among her works. Few understood her significance. The castle sat empty after Hearst's departure in May 1947. The Hearst Corporation owned it. The family discussed what to do with it. Maintaining the property cost enormous sums. The 165 rooms required staff. The gardens needed constant care. The pools, the fountains, the structures all demanded maintenance. Without Hearst living there, the expense seemed unjustifiable. Selling the castle posed problems. Who would buy a 165-room mansion on a remote California hilltop? What commercial purpose could it serve? The art collection alone created complications. 20,000 objects, many priceless, all requiring security and climate control. Donors or buyers would need resources matching Hearst's. In 1952, Robert Gordon Sproul, president of the University of California, Berkeley, proposed that the castle be donated to the university as a historic monument. Hearst had considered leaving it to Berkeley in his will, but the university chancellor concluded the institution couldn't manage such a property. The maintenance costs, the remoteness, the complexity of operating a historic house museum exceeded Berkeley's capabilities. The university declined. Trial tours were conducted in September 1952 to assess public interest. The tours lasted more than 2 hours initially. Guides realized that was too long. They reduced the tours to 1 hour plus the bus trip up and down the hill. The response was positive. People wanted to see Hearst Castle. The question was whether the interest would sustain itself and whether the Hearst Corporation wanted to operate a tourist attraction. The answer would take 5 more years to arrive. The castle waited, empty but maintained, while the family and corporation decided its fate. The Enchanted Hill had outlasted its builder. That was always how it was going to end. Chapter 9. The Gift. What do you do with a castle? This was the problem facing the Hearst Corporation in 1951. William Randolph Hearst was dead. The castle at San Simeon contained 165 rooms filled with 20,000 works of art. It required constant maintenance. The annual utility bill alone exceeded $250,000. It sat on 250,000 acres of ranch land that continued generating income from cattle operations. But the castle itself, beautiful, historic, expensive, completely impractical. The trial tours in September 1952 demonstrated public interest. People wanted to see inside William Randolph Hearst's monument. They wanted to swim, metaphorically, in the Neptune pool where Clark Gable swam. They wanted to walk through the refectory where Charlie Chaplin ate dinner. They wanted to stand in the assembly room where Winston Churchill once stood. The castle wasn't just architecture, it was mythology. But the University of California couldn't take it. The logistics were impossible. The remoteness made staffing difficult. The maintenance costs were staggering. The art collection required expertise Berkeley didn't have. Robert Gordon Sproul's proposal failed. The castle needed a different solution. December 1957. The Hearst Corporation decided to donate the castle and its contents to the state of California. The decision made sense financially and symbolically. The corporation got tax benefits from the donation. The state gained one of California's most significant historic properties. The public got access to a monument previously restricted to Hearst's invited guests. Everyone benefited. The donation included the castle buildings, the art collection, and approximately 150 acres of immediate grounds, the gardens, terraces, pools, and structures. The Hearst family retained 82,000 acres of surrounding ranch land. The working cattle ranch continues operating today under Hearst family ownership. The conservation easement established in 2005 further protects the undeveloped character of the coast. The deed of gift was recorded in January 1958. The dedicatory plaque installed at the castle reads, June 2nd, 1958. Dedication ceremonies were held for the Hearst San Simeon State Historical Monument at the Early Visitor Center near the current location. Following the ceremonies, tours opened to the public at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a first-come, first-served basis. Tickets cost $2 for adults, $1 for children aged 6 to 12. The response exceeded expectations. The most exclusive address in America became accessible to anyone with $2. The transformation was total. The castle that had required invitations from William Randolph Hearst himself could now be visited by school teachers, factory workers, families on vacation. The Neptune pool, where Hollywood stars had swum, became a photo opportunity for tourists. The refectory where dignitaries had dined became part of a guided tour. The assembly room where Hearst had orchestrated social events became a museum exhibit. California state parks assumed responsibility for operations and preservation. The foundation at Hearst Castle, originally called Friends of Hearst Castle, was established in 1985 as a nonprofit cooperating association. The foundation raises funds for educational programs, interpretive exhibits, and artifact preservation. The partnership between the state and the foundation provides resources for maintaining one of America's most complex historic properties. June 22, 1972, Hearst Castle was added to the National Register of Historic Places. May 11, 1976. It became a United States National Historic Landmark. These designations recognize the castle's architectural and cultural significance. Julia Morgan's Mediterranean Revival masterpiece, William Randolph Hearst's Monument to Ambition. America's most accessible example of early 20th century wealth. The donation solved problems, but created new ones. Historic preservation is expensive. The silk textiles that decorated rooms deteriorated despite careful climate control. The mosaic pavements needed specialized conservation. The materials joining built-in art objects to building surfaces aged and failed. Every year brought new preservation challenges requiring expertise and funding. The annual operating costs remain substantial. Utility bills exceed $250,000. In years requiring major restoration work, total expenses can reach $8 million. The foundation at Hearst Castle helps fund conservation projects the state budget can't fully cover. The partnership makes preservation possible. The tours evolved over decades. Initially, one tour covered the main highlights. As visitor interest grew, California State Parks developed multiple tours focusing on different aspects of the castle. The Grand Rooms Tour introduces first-time visitors to the main spaces. The Upstairs Suites Tour explores private quarters. Evening tours, launched in April 1989, recreate an evening at the castle in the 1930s, with costumed docents performing tableaux. The variety allows repeat visitors to experience different areas across multiple trips. The castle functions simultaneously as museum and historic house. California State Parks maintains it to look as it did during Hearst's time. Furniture remains where Hearst and Morgan placed it. Art objects occupy their original positions. The goal is to preserve the appearance of a private residence despite the property being a state park. The distinction matters. This isn't just a collection of beautiful objects. It's a preserved environment showing how William Randolph Hearst lived. June 2, 1958. The castle that had been the most exclusive address in America opened to anyone with $2. The private kingdom became public property. William Randolph Hearst had built it to impress the powerful. His family gave it to everyone else. That generosity came with complications. Preservation is difficult. Access is challenging. The castle remains remote, requiring a 5-mile bus ride up steep hillside roads. Weather affects operations. Rain closes outdoor tours. The logistics of moving thousands of visitors through a historic property weekly require constant management, but the complications are manageable. The castle survives. The question facing the castle in 1957 was whether it would become a wealthy family's locked-away treasure or a public monument accessible to everyone. The Hearst Corporation made the right choice. They gave it away. That decision transformed the castle's meaning from symbol of exclusivity to symbol of shared heritage. William Randolph Hearst tried to control his legacy with 28 newspapers. His family controlled it by surrendering the castle. The buildings outlast the builders. The architecture outlasts the empire. The dream outlasts the dreamer. Chapter 10. The Castle. Today, you board a bus at the visitor center. The recorded narration begins. Alex Trebek's voice, explaining what you're about to see. The bus winds up 5 miles of hillside. Zebras still wander. Descendants of Hearst's exotic zoo still here 70 years after he had to sell their ancestors. The bus climbs 1,600 feet. The Twin Towers come into view. The green copper roof catches afternoon light out exactly as Julia Morgan designed it to in 1919. You are going where Chaplin went, where Churchill went, where Gable and Garbo and Grant all went. But you paid $36, not $2, and you'll get 60 minutes, not a weekend. California State Parks manages Hearst San Simeon State Historical Monument. The property attracts between 700,000 and 1.5 million visitors annually, depending on whose estimates you believe and whether the counting includes multiple visits. It ranks among California's top tourist destinations. The remoteness doesn't deter visitors. The isolation is part of the appeal. You don't stumble onto Hearst Castle. You make a deliberate journey. 4 distinct daytime tours operate year-round, except Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's Day. The Grand Rooms Tour is recommended for first-time visitors. It covers the main social spaces on the ground floor of Casa Grande. You see the assembly room with its soaring Spanish ceiling and tapestries. You walk through the refectory, where Hearst dined with Hollywood royalty. You glimpse the Gothic study and the morning room. The tour includes both outdoor pools, the Neptune pool, where you can photograph but not swim, and the Roman pool, with its overwhelming blue and gold Murano tiles. 60 minutes. Guards carefully monitor to ensure no one touches anything. Photography is permitted in most areas. The upstairs suites tour explores the private quarters. You see bedrooms Hearst's guests slept in, the Doge's suite, the Della Robbia room, the library. Each space is furnished exactly as it was during Hearst's occupancy. The linens on the beds, the books on the shelves, the personal objects on tables, all preserved to create the impression that Hearst might walk through the door any moment. The tour emphasizes the castle as a lived-in home rather than a museum. The evening tour operates seasonally on Friday and Saturday nights in spring and fall. This tour recreates an evening at Hearst Castle in the 1930s. Costumed docents in period clothing provide tableaus throughout the house. You might encounter a woman in a 1930s gown talking on a vintage telephone. You'll see people playing billiards in period costume. The reenactments show how guests spent their evenings. The tour is longer than daytime versions and includes areas not usually accessible. The smaller group sizes create a more intimate experience. The castle at night, lit softly, feels more like the private residence it once was. The Building the Dream film screens continuously at the visitor center on a 5-story screen. 40 minutes of narration and archival footage covering the castle's construction, Hearst's life, and Julia Morgan's architectural career. The film provides context before you board the bus. Most visitors watch it before their tour. Preservation remains the primary challenge. 20,000 artifacts require constant conservation. The silk textiles in the Gothic study and other rooms deteriorate despite climate control efforts. Conservators periodically remove them for treatment, then rehang them using techniques that minimize damage. The process is expensive and time-consuming. The mosaic pavements throughout the castle face particular challenges. The materials joining the tiles to the underlying surfaces age and fail. Water intrusion damages both tiles and substrate. In the early 2010s, the main vestibule mosaic required removal and reconstruction. Conservators lifted the entire mosaic, built an aluminum frame supporting structure, then reinstalled the tiles. The project cost over $1 million and took years to complete. The Neptune pool underwent major restoration recently. The pool had been emptied for repairs. Conservators sourced replacement marble from Vermont quarries matching the original material. They addressed persistent water leaks that had plagued the structure for decades. The restoration preserved Julia Morgan's design while updating infrastructure to prevent future damage. The pool is now refilled and visitors can photograph its restored grandeur. Climate control is difficult in buildings designed in the 1920s without modern HVAC systems. Julia Morgan didn't plan for the kind of environmental controls museums require. Retrofitting climate control into historic structures without damaging architectural features requires careful engineering. The balance between preservation needs and historic integrity creates constant challenges. The foundation at Hearst Castle, established in 1985, provides crucial support. California State Parks' budget doesn't fully cover the castle's needs. The foundation raises money through memberships, special events, and grants. These funds support educational programs, conservation projects, and interpretive exhibits. The partnership between state government and private foundation makes the castle's operation possible. The zebras remain. Descendants of the animals Hearst imported for his zoo in the 1920s still roam the hillsides. They're wild now, not managed or contained. Visitors driving up to the castle often spot them grazing near the road. The zebras are photogenic, unexpected, a living connection to Hearst's original vision. They're also the castle's unofficial mascots. The foundation sells zebra-themed merchandise. The animals that Hearst once kept in the world's largest private zoo now live free on the same land. The castle William Randolph Hearst built is not the castle he imagined. He imagined privacy. The public tours it. He imagined control. The state of California manages it. He imagined immortality through his newspapers. He got immortality through architecture and one movie he tried to destroy. The castle endures. The newspapers are mostly forgotten. Citizen Kane is studied in film schools. Worldwide, the Twin Towers dominate the Central California coast exactly as Julia Morgan designed them to. The Neptune pool still reflects California sky. The Roman pool still overwhelms with blue and gold tile. The 20,000 artifacts still fill 165 rooms. The gardens still bloom. The fountains still flow. 700,000 visitors annually walk through spaces where Charlie Chaplin performed impromptu comedy routines, where Winston Churchill ate dinner off paper. Napkins, where Marion Davies hosted the most exclusive parties in America, where William Randolph Hearst tried to write himself into history as someone grand. The castle is beautiful. The preservation is excellent. The tours are informative. The setting is spectacular. But the meaning has transformed. This isn't Hearst's private kingdom anymore. It's California's public monument. The exclusivity that defined it for 22 years gave way to accessibility that's defined it for 66 years. And counting. The lessons accumulate. Buildings outlast the people who build them. Monuments outlast the powerful. Public generosity matters more than private wealth. Julia Morgan's architecture proved more durable than William Randolph Hearst's newspapers. The castle he built to immortalize his vision became the monument that immortalized hers. And somewhere in the irony, there's justice. The man who tried to rewrite history from inside a castle discovered he couldn't control the ending. History rewrote him instead. The castle just stands there, beautiful and indifferent, outlasting everyone who tried to claim it. Closing, William Randolph Hearst owned 28 newspapers at his peak. He reached 20 million readers daily. He could start wars, destroy political careers, shape public opinion across America. He built the most elaborate private residence in the nation to announce his power. He filled it with 20,000 artifacts to demonstrate his taste. He hosted the most exclusive parties to prove his social dominance. He spent $559 million in today's currency, building a monument to William Randolph Hearst's vision of William Randolph Hearst. None of it worked. The newspapers are mostly gone. The empire collapsed. The political ambitions failed. The wealth evaporated. What remains is the castle, but not as Hearst imagined it. He built it as private kingdom. His family gave it away. He built it to control the narrative. The narrative controlled him instead. He tried to suppress one movie. That movie became the story everyone remembers. Charles Foster Kane, Xanadu, Rosebud. The fictional version proved more durable than the real one. Julia Morgan made 558 trips to San Simeon. She designed something that would outlast everyone involved. The Twin Towers still stand. The Neptune pool still reflects sky. The Roman pool still overwhelms with blue and gold. Her architecture proved more permanent than his empire. The buildings outlast the builders. They always do. Marion Davies gave Hearst 34 years and $2 million when he was bankrupt. She saved him. History remembered her as the talentless mistress from Citizen Kane. The cruelest irony is that the monument Hearst built as his legacy became the stage for her erasure. She was the queen of the enchanted hill. She deserved better than what history gave her. 700,000 people visit annually now. They walk through rooms where power once lived. They photograph pools where celebrities once swam. They stand in spaces designed to announce one man's grandeur. But the grandeur belongs to California now. The exclusivity that defined the castle for 22 years gave way to accessibility that's defined it for 66 years. The transformation matters more than the architecture. Hearst tried to write history from inside his castle. History wrote him anyway. The newspapers couldn't control it. The money couldn't buy it. The castle couldn't contain it. What endures isn't what he built. It's what happened despite his building it. If this story resonated with you, consider the estates and monuments in your own region. Not just the famous ones, but the forgotten builders, the erased contributors, the women whose names disappeared from records. History remembers selectively, and sometimes we can correct it. The zebras still wander the hillsides at San Simeon. Descendants of Hearst's zoo outlasting everything except the architecture. Even the animals prove more durable than the empire. The castle just stands there, beautiful and indifferent, outlasting everyone who tried to claim it.